Hello everybody. It is July 12th, 2026 here in the United States of America. Sorry for the lack of content this weekend. My usual Saturday video was postponed until today because I had a panahida to go to, which is a memorial service in the Orthodox Church for somebody in the parish that had passed away about a year ago. So I had to do that yesterday morning. Didn't really have a lot of time to get up to the studio and produce a video, so I am doing it today. It's fairly nice out. It's a little bit cooler out. I feel like coming outside, getting some fresh air, and doing a video out here. This will be a short one. This is actually about Senator Lindsey Graham dying, as some of you may know. Very controversial senator, Lindsey Graham, has passed away of an apparent heart attack in his home. Now, Lindsey Graham was a very controversial figure in U.S. politics. I myself, not really much of a fan. He was pretty universally reviled by the populist wing of the MAGA movement and the Republican Party. The left certainly didn't like him, both the populist left and the radical left. And I think the only people that really did like Lindsey Graham were probably old boomers that watch Fox News or very ardently pro-Israel individuals, but everyone else seemed to dislike him very much. Now, he was an influential, he wasn't a member of Trump's administration, but he seemed to have a close relationship with the president, much to the anger of many of President Trump's more populist supporters. Again, Lindsey Graham is not exactly a very popular individual amongst that group. Lindsey Graham seemed to be somebody that, and this is my personal opinion before we get into what actually I think happened with his death. President Trump kept Lindsey Graham around despite his lack of popularity with much of Trump's base, partly to curry favor with the old guard Republicans within Congress. Lindsey Graham was a very influential member of Congress and could easily impede legislation that President Trump wanted to have passed. And being an old school American politician, probably somebody who was very corrupt with a lot of skeletons in his closet, this was probably somebody that President Trump had to deal with in a way that maybe he's not accustomed to dealing with people. You know, he can't simply bully this person. He has too much sway and power within the U.S. government to do that, so maybe Trump kept him around and placated him to maintain his support amongst, say, the boomer evangelical wing of the Republican Party and the faction of like the old guard Republicans within Congress. Also, President Trump may have personally liked him. I'm not really sure. I'm not President Trump, but those are just my thoughts on why Graham stuck around so much, despite many people disliking him so much. Also, too, I think he was kept around as a mad dog, so to speak. Somebody who would bark at the adversaries or rivals at the United States, often threaten war, be somebody there that would always talk about the most aggressive sanction packages, military intervention, things like that. He had a very aggressive stance against most countries that America has a contentious relationship with, and I think he was kept around as to be like the mad dog, so to speak, kind of like what the Russians do with Medvedev. You know, he often talks about, you know, nuking Europe and war with Europe and calling European leaders dogs and cowards. This is kind of, I think, Lindsey Graham's role with Trump, was he was kind of kept around for that reason too. But anyways, he did die of an apparent heart attack. Now, he just recently visited Kiev and apparently visited a super secret drone factory that was, from what I understand, destroyed shortly thereafter. So some people are saying that he was actually killed by the Russians and that this is being covered up by the US government to avoid some kind of massive diplomatic scandal. Now, I don't think that was true at all. I don't think he was killed by the Russians for several reasons. His presence in Kiev would be no secret. There are back channels between the United States and Russia to prevent a nuclear war or prevent some kind of conflict from breaking out because, say, the Russians inadvertently kill a U.S. diplomat on Ukrainian soil. Both sides are trying to avoid such a scenario. You know, like when the Russians actually launch the Orezhnik missile systems into Ukraine, these hypersonic ballistic missiles that can potentially carry nuclear warheads, generally speaking, which, just generally speaking, I know they do this, but they actually notify the U.S. government ahead of time through back channels to prevent nuclear war that this is going to happen, so somebody in NATO or the U.S. side doesn't mistake this for a ballistic missile launch or nuclear armed ballistic missile launch towards the United States, this is something that could trigger a nuclear war. So yes, there are back channels between Russia and the United States, despite our current adversarial relationship, that try to prevent a larger conflict from breaking out. So when U.S. diplomats actually visit Kiev, the Russians are fully aware of it. They're made aware that Senator Lindsey Graham is going to visit Kiev. That way, he isn't inadvertently killed in some kind of airstrike. And they do this across the board, which I think is pretty funny, because when these, Western diplomats go to Ukraine, they act like they're doing something that's so brave and, just daring and dashing. Like they're going into a war zone. They could be killed. No, they won't be killed, because the Russians know they're there, and they're not going to drop an Iskander ballistic missile on a building that contains a high-ranking official from the EU, or maybe like the president or prime minister of another country, or a senator like Lindsey Graham. That's just not going to happen. So no, the Russians aren't going to purposefully kill a U.S. senator on Ukrainian soil. That doesn't benefit them. That doesn't benefit us. That doesn't benefit anybody, and that would just be bad all around, because it would put the United States in a position where they have to respond using some kind of military fashion, and that could really accelerate the U.S.'s involvement in this war more than it really is. And I think the U.S., Trump's administration, would like to avoid that, and the Russians also would like to avoid such a thing too. So yes, they would prefer to not kill a U.S. senator on Ukrainian soil. That's just common sense. Now, would the Russians like to have maybe taken Lindsey Graham out because of Lindsey Graham's influence on what happened in Ukraine in 2014? Yeah, I'm sure there's some grudges there, and they're not too thrilled with him about that. But ultimately, Lindsey Graham is not the architect of U.S. foreign policy. He's a very loud, mad dog. He's not the one determining U.S. foreign policy. He's pulled in there by the State Department to say certain things or advocate for certain things, but he himself is not the architect of it. So him being taken out by the Russians, whether poisoned or taken out in an airstrike, is highly unlikely and actually won't really change or do anything. Now, as far as this drone factory being blown up that he was at, I would have to assume that while the Russians did know that he was in Kiev, if he did visit a drone factory that was destroyed, my guess is that the Ukrainians brought him to this drone factory. Now, Lindsey Graham being such a high-ranking member of like the U.S. government, I'm sure there would be a lot of buzz around his presence in Ukraine. You have U.S. State Department sources that know where he's at. I'm sure you have Russian intelligence that knows where he's at. I'm sure you have Ukrainian police that know he's there. I'm sure you have Russian spies on the ground within Kiev that know where he is. So if this factory was destroyed, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm guessing that his location was being tracked or leaked, and when he went to this drone factory, well, the Russians perhaps waited for him to go to this drone factory, confirmed it was a drone factory, waited for him to leave, and then hit it. They didn't hit it with him there. And I think it was probably foolish for the Ukrainians to bring such a high-ranking member of the U.S. military or U.S. government to a super-secret drone factory. Seems to be a bad idea, kind of foolish all around. But again, I don't know what actually took place. I don't know if this is really what happened, if this particular factory was destroyed right after he left. I don't know these things. It's just what I've seen on Twitter. I'm simply speculating. But it does appear that Lindsey Graham indeed died at home of a heart attack. The last report I read was that he was having chest pains at his home, and then shortly thereafter went into cardiac arrest. Now, Lindsey Graham is 71 years old, and he was also a Southerner. I'm sure his diet wasn't amazing, and he was in his 70s. And somebody dying of a heart attack at 71 is not something that is unheard of, especially here in the United States. So I do think his death was legitimately from natural causes. I don't think there's any grand conspiracy around this. It really isn't surprising given his age, his travel schedule, and probably his bad diet. So that's really all I wanted to say. Yes, Lindsey Graham has passed away. His Senate seat will now be open. He was a very controversial figure within American politics, disliked by very many, myself included, liked by some. And again, regardless of what people thought of him, he was a very influential figure within American politics. And I guess we'll see how his passing changes things. But yes, indeed, he is gone. Now, anyways, this is all for this video. It's really all I wanted to talk about. I didn't really have much else to say about the death of Lindsey Graham or involvement of the United States within Ukraine at this time. I'll be back hopefully Monday or Tuesday with another video. It's It's actually kind of easy to come out here and do a video as opposed to my office, because my house is sometimes loud and chaotic, and it's hard to find the time to get up to my studio and actually record a video in the peace and quiet. Unfortunately out here, it's kind of hard to show prep. I don't have notes in front of me, so I'm just kind of going off the cuff. But it seems like this one went pretty well. So maybe I'll do that more often, make it easier to produce content more reliably. But anyways, I hope everyone out there has a fantastic weekend. Enjoy it. For those in the path of this next heat wave, please stay cool. It's going to be high 90s here for maybe 3 or 4 days, and then it's going to drop back down into the 80s, so it shouldn't be too bad. But anyways, God bless everyone, and take care.